Mr. Chairman, thank you for that, and thank you for your leadership in this particular area. Most Americans are not familiar with the term transnational repression. It's not a household term or household phrase, but Americans understand the concept. Transnational repression occurs when authoritarian governments go beyond their borders to harass and intimidate their citizens, those who defend human rights abroad, or anyone they consider to be a threat to their regimes. Governments who have gotten away with silencing dissident inside their own country are now trying to stifle free speech around the world, including the United States. Just last week, the Department of Justice, as the chairman referred to, unsealed an indictment alleging an Indian government official engaged in a plot to assassinate a U.S. citizen in New York City. It should surprise no one that China is leading the world in using transnational repression to quash any sign of dissent. Last month, CCP, Chinese Communist Party protesters, funded by the Chinese consulate, harassed and assaulted human rights advocates on U.S. soil at APEC in San Francisco. The failure of the administration and the city government to prevent or even respond to these attacks is deeply unfortunate. The administration prioritized a smooth meeting with Xi Jinping over addressing this issue publicly. Hong Kong authorities are increasingly engaged in acts of transnational repression. This fall, Hong Kong authorities issued bounties for political dissidents who left the city, some of whom are seeking asylum in the United States. Prominent Hong Kong businessman Jimmy Lee remains unjustly imprisoned, while the CCP harasses his international legal team. I look forward to hearing directly from Ms. Gallagher on that matter today. Beyond Asia, it is clear the legacy of Soviet tyranny looms large in Eurasia. Russia sends its operatives to poison, intimidate, and sometimes assassinate members of the opposition and dissidents in exile. A few years ago, the Russians actually shot a man in the head in a public park in Germany in broad daylight. They also poisoned a man in a park in England in 2018, which a lot of us, of course, are very familiar with. There's no boundaries that they will respect, and that is clear. Our NATO ally, Turkey, is also a top offender. While it has decried acts of transnational repression that takes place on its soil, it has also used these same tactics to suppress Turkish dissidents outside of the country. This is evidenced by its pursuit of members of the Gulenist movement, including former NBA player Enes Kanter Freedom, who has had his Turkish passport canceled while abroad. Interpol red alerts issued for his arrest, and threats so aggressive the FBI has issued him a call button. The Iranian regime is another egregious yet unsurprising offender. It targets dissidents and critics abroad to include murder and kidnapping plots against Americans on U.S. soil. As countries fail to push back on these increasingly brazen actions that undermine sovereignty and national security, perpetrators grow more emboldened and additional countries adopt similar tactics. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today on what more can be done to stop this egregious practice, and in particular, I want to hear what we, as the United States government, can do about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First line of questioning from Mr. Grosset. I'm always struck that every time we see a Russian poisoning case, they use the same poison all the time, it seems like, and it's also one that is easily identifiable and traced back to the FSB or one of their agencies. I'm assuming this is done to send a message as much as anything else, that they're doing this and they're not trying to do it secretly. They want people to understand what they've done. Am I right in that assessment?
That is a good of an analysis as anyone. We don't know what exactly is in their head, but my conclusion is that they have an optional approach. They are trying to use a weapon that they continually improve over the years and invest millions and millions in making more efficient, on the hope that it may remain undiscovered. But in the case it gets discovered, it has such a scary reputation that it achieves a different outcome, which is fear and intimidation. So they win from their point of view either way. If it remains undiscovered, they win. If it gets discovered and it points to them, they also win. They have zero reputation cost, and thus you're right that they don't mind being discovered.
Well, and on top of that, the Russians are notorious that when they do get caught red-handed, whatever they're doing, they just lie about it. A good example of that's the invasion of Ukraine. They get on TV all the time and say, "Well, this wasn't our fault. America did this. America caused this." It's phenomenal that they can do that, and yet people shrug their shoulders and walk away from it. So anyway, well, listen, for all three of you, I have a question that I'd like to perhaps a general answer, and time's limited. So if you'd give me as brief an answer as you could, I would appreciate it. I think we're at a point on the planet where countries are deciding which club they're going to belong to. Is it a freedom and democracy and a government that is created by the people and operated by the people and disciplined by the people, or is it a dictatorship, an autocracy? And of course, the two governments operate very, very differently. And I note that none of the cases that have been referred to here today come from democratic countries. They come from the autocracies. So I think that our challenge as human beings in this century, in the 21st century, is going to be trying to figure out how the two groups of countries exist on this planet without killing each other. Because I think one thing we can all agree on, North Korea, Iran, China, they're not going to change. They're going to be the same for a long, long time to come for the foreseeable future. You hope that there's some change, but hope, as we all know, isn't much of a strategy. And the democracies are not going to change. We're not going to change. Great Britain's not going to change. The countries that make up those the group of free countries aren't going to change. So the conduct we're talking about specifically in this hearing are small instances, and I say that not to demean them, because when I say small, I mean compared to a war like what's going on in Ukraine or in Israel. They're a unique, specific incident. They wind up in a newspaper reporting. Everybody reads it and what have you, but they turn the page and move on to sports or something else. So how do we deal with these? From country to country, how do we as a country deal with these, with the countries who perpetrate that and other free countries without going to war over them, obviously? And there needs to be some kind of discipline. There needs to be some kind of accountability. But how do you do that? What's your recommendation in how we deal with these? Let's go down to ideas just like we started. Mr. Grossoff, if you'd start.
Very briefly, and I've said this before, I would advocate for invoking the principle of universal jurisdiction whenever feasible to investigate crimes that otherwise remain uninvestigated, because bad actors are not going to investigate themselves. So many countries have the principle of universal jurisdiction. Partly the United States can invoke it, but a crime that happens across several countries outside of the United States and has its core, its basis of an action decided in Moscow can still be prosecuted, but it is not at the moment. Everybody delivers the benefit of the principle of judicial sovereignty to bad actors, and this is one way that it, I think, can be somewhat curtailed. But you also pointed out that not every country is in the camp of either the bad actor or the good actor. Some countries are borderline. They're nominally democracies, and they are in many respects democracies, but they sometimes are afraid of taking action against China or Russia because of economic pressures. And those are very insidious non-actions sometimes. For example, Bulgaria, Hungary, Georgia, the country of Georgia, within certain governments are afraid to prosecute Russian crime or Chinese crime that happens on their territory. And such non-actions actually can be sanctioned. Sanctions can be imposed against the people not prosecuting by the United States. So these are two examples I could see as very practical.
I'm out of time, but briefly, Mr. Abramowitz.
Thank you for the question. A couple points I'd like to make. First of all, I think since Freedom House began reporting on this phenomenon 3 or 4 years ago, I think that democratic governments have actually begun to kind of be much more aware of the problem and to actually do things about it. Is it perfect? No. But you see law enforcement agencies like the Justice Department, Homeland Security, the FBI, their agents are being educated about the problem. They're noticing these cases that they might not have noticed before. We talk with Western democracies as well. They are really beginning to be much more focused on this issue. There's not like a silver bullet, Senator, with this. I think that you know, in my testimony, I outlined a range of different things: sanctions, visa bans, you know, the creation of tip lines for people to tip off law enforcement. This is going to be a generational struggle, I think. You know, Russia, as you pointed out, Russia and China are not going anywhere. Other countries are choosing sides now. And I think what's really important is for particularly the United States government and other democracies to make clear that this is unacceptable behavior and to not sweep this under the rug. So when, especially you know, people that are friendly to the United States, I mentioned India and Saudi Arabia, and these are, in Saudi Arabia is a significant perpetrator of transnational repression. We've had 2 big cases that have been outlined from India recently. This should be a matter that is in the bilateral relationship, and if it's seen as being swept under the rug, then I think other governments will not take it as seriously.